Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Actually, it's evening here.
Yeah, it depends, I guess. We are all over the world.
Yes,
Who actually has the morning? Not me.
not me.
Oh, Ken has the morning. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. How is everyone?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Ken, are we gonna break into Zoom rooms today? So I'm ready to do it. Are we gonna do it again today?
I think so.
All right.
We'll see how it goes.
Mhm.
But I am assuming that that's a possibility. Is this better with the speaker? With this
Yep.
little microphone?
It looks cooler.
That's important.
Yep. I have a microphone also, guys.
Ah, good.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, Barney.
Hi, Ken. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to listen to you.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Sergey, I would ask, give me please access to recording, if it's possible.
Are you putting that in the chat? Sergey, or will you be sending it to people?
No, I will send actual recordings, right?
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you could send me a copy also,
Absolutely. Yep.
perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what is your plan? Do you think we're expecting more people, or shall we begin?
Well, we had 17. Let's maybe a minute. I know Lynn cannot make it today, but that's all I know.
I received a message from Peter Singer that he's unable to make it today also. He has a mediation.
Okay, Yulia's here.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, you there.
Well, perhaps if it's okay with you, Sergey,
Yeah, let's go.
we could start with questions. And see if anyone has any issues that came up from yesterday, any topics that they are concerned about, or reflections on the day, or burning questions that they are desperate to find an answer to, or vigorous disagreements. Even yelling and shouting is okay.
Yeah, let's create a conflict and try to resolve it.
There you go.
I was not able to attend yesterday. Is there any kind of a summary or place where I could get caught up?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. Sergey, do you have the, oh yeah, those are, they're in the chat, Chuck. And I think you can download them there.
I can definitely email everybody recordings of yesterday.
Right.
But yesterday we
Okay.
basically discussed the structure and the depth of psychology behind a conflict and how it can be perceived at different levels.
Okay. While people are joining us and while people are considering what questions they may have, let me begin with a question that I think is deceptively simple, but very revealing. And the question is, who does not experience conflicts? Who doesn't get into conflicts at all? And I think that there are some limited answers that are very useful for us. Here are three. One, there are no 2-year-olds who experience conflicts over romantic love. Why? They're not ready yet. Number two, there are no 60-year-olds, we hope, who experience conflicts with their parents over curfew. Why? Because they've figured out how to solve that problem for themselves. So in other words, we can say that, to take the title of a book that I wrote, every conflict takes place at a crossroads that is defined on the one hand by a problem that we are now required to solve in order to learn and grow and evolve into who we actually are. And number two, by the fact that we do not yet have the skills we need in order to solve it. And therefore, every conflict is a little arrow pointing directly at what we most need to learn in order to develop the skills to evolve, not just beyond that conflict, but beyond all similar conflicts. And what do we get as a consequence? We get higher order conflicts. So think about the conflicts in your own life and how they have evolved. Nobody on this call gets into conflicts with children on the playground over who gets to play with the toys. Why? Because we've figured out how to play with one another in a more useful and constructive way. So when babies are born, if you take two babies and put them next to one another and give them a toy, they will engage in what is called parallel play. They hardly interact with one another at all. They're hardly even aware of one another's presence. Twins are a little different, but babies, generally speaking, engage in just parallel play. But at a certain point in their development, they become aware of the other baby and want to play with the other baby. And then they begin to transition into what is called cooperative play. And all of the conflicts between those two babies will take place in the transition from parallel play to cooperative play. Or in other words, from a lower order of conflict to a higher, more evolved order of conflict. And what do we get when we receive, you put two babies and they want to play with one another and one baby takes the toy away from the other one, and the other one then screams or yells or bites or kicks or whatever it is that the baby will do. And that represents a relatively low order of skill. So they are way, way down at the bottom of the crossroads that I described before. This is a problem that they now have to solve, but their first step in solving it isn't proving successful. And so they need to figure out a more evolved set of skills, like, if you pass me the toy, I will pass it back to you, and we can play with one another and enjoy our time together. And isn't this a kind of metaphor for all of our relationships, our marriages, the significant others in our lives, the children that we have, our siblings, our parents, our friends? All of these are relationships that are evolving. And one of the principal sources of evolution is conflict. Because what conflict does is it reveals to us the places where we are stuck, where we are not growing, where we are not evolving. So we can say that the first crossroads of conflict, but for these two small children who want to play together, is this: am I going to behave badly and yell and scream and kick and punch and bite? Or am I going to try to figure out a way of talking about what the problem is and coming up with a solution? That's a first crossroads. And then what we discover is, after we have figured out how to do that, there's a second crossroads, which is, am I going to sort of listen to what the other person has to say about what happened to them, or simply repeat my story and expect them to agree with me? Am I capable of experiencing empathy with the other person? That's a second crossroads, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth. And all we get in life are higher orders of conflict. And how do we get to evolve from one order to the next? We get to evolve by learning higher order resolution skills. Now, what are the various resolution skills that are useful for us? What are the levels of conflict resolution? And here I think we can identify a series. Here's the first one: stopping the fighting. Ceasefire, which Ukraine is right now seeking and trying to create. It is the most basic, fundamental step in conflict. Stop shooting at each other. Stop beating each other up. And then the second step is to sit down together and talk about how to solve the problem. But let's notice this. Let's take as an example, if you see two children on a playground who are beginning to fight with one another, and you are present, what is the very first thing you want to do if you are there and the children are starting to fight? And the answer is, you will separate them. You will stop the fighting and move them apart from one another. Excellent, good work. You have stopped the conflict from escalating. But that's all that you have done. And notice that separating is a very useful technique, and we use it in mediation. It's called a caucus. And we caucus in mediation as a way of stopping the aggressive dynamics, the adversarial dynamics that pit people against one another, the enemy creating dynamics that impact all of us when we are in conflict on all levels, nation states and individuals and couples and communities and organizations. So that's the first step. So separating kids is wonderful, but it's not going to help you talk about the problem because everybody's separated. So now we need a higher order solution in order to bring people together to have a conversation about what the nature of the problem is. And that means we have to have skills in convening people, in having them sit down together, in opening a conversation between them, in asking them questions that will elicit what is the nature of the problem, in analyzing the problem, trying to figure out what it's actually about, brainstorming solutions, establishing criteria for a successful outcome. All of these are methodologies that are a part of the second order of conflict resolution, which is not stopping the fighting, it's settling the issues. So we start with stopping the fighting, and if we haven't stopped the fighting, we can't meet together and try to settle the issues. So first we have to stop the fighting in order to actually bring people into the same room where they can sit down together and talk. And sometimes with couples, with families, the line between these two is not fixed. It's not firm. It can sometimes disappear in the course of a simple conversation. And we then have to move back into separating people or turning them inward. What we are doing is we are taking a phrase which we have in English. I don't know if you have this in Ukrainian. It takes two to tango, meaning it takes two to create the dance of conflict. And that's what conflict is. It is the dance of opposites. And I have a book with that title. And so what do? We stop the music. We stop the dance. We put people in separate corners. We go back and forth between them in shuttle diplomacy. All of these are techniques for working at conflict at a low level of skill. And that low level of skill may be all that you are able to bring to the conflict. Sometimes that is the case. If you are dealing with an intransigent party, that may be as far as you get. And now, what happens next? Well, what happens next is we sit down together and talk about the problems and try to come up with a settlement of the issues. Second level. There's a third level, which is not reached by doing that. And the third level is to resolve the underlying emotional reasons that gave rise to the dispute and will continue to generate new disputes until it's resolved. The underlying dynamic of the conflict. So we can, going back to the example I gave yesterday, two kids who are fighting over which piece of cake goes to each child, we can settle that pretty easily. We can stop the fighting. We can settle the issue there's a mathematics of it that's been proven. And mathematically, what you do is one person cuts the cake in two parts, and the other one shaves off a piece off of one of those pieces and puts it in the other pile. And you can keep that process going, or you can simply stop then and say, okay, it's the other person's choice, which piece of cake they're going to get. But if you do this, you will come out to the closest to equal amount of cake for each person. But now let's assume that one of the siblings is 2 years old and the other is 18. Do they get an equal amount of cake? Or should the 18-year-old get a little more cake? Or maybe a little less? One of them is really hungry, and the other one isn't hungry at all, but doesn't want the first one to get the cake. Right? So simply saying 50-50 isn't the best, most optimal outcome. And why does the 2-year-old say, I want half the cake, even if they aren't hungry? For emotional reasons. It's not about the cake. And that's the difficulty that we have in virtually every conflict. Only superficially is it about the issues that people are arguing about. More deeply than that, it is about the meaning of those issues. And that's the place where what we require is emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and emotionally informed technique. And so separating the kids on the playground isn't going to help you settle the issues. Settling the issues is going to lay the foundation for, but isn't itself going to be a solution to the emotional issues. You're going to analyze the issues in order to settle them, but you aren't going to analyze somebody else's emotions. What we want to do is to understand, using a different kind of methodology, when it comes to emotions. Emotions are rational, or rather, let me put it this way, they are not irrational. They are non-rational. And what I mean by that is they have their own rationality, but it's not the same as ordinary logic. And now what we have to do is to figure out how to move from a linear approach to logic to a dynamical one, to one that moves flexibly. Secondly, with regard to an issue, we can say who's right and who's wrong. And sometimes there will be an answer to that. But who's right about what you feel? And the answer is the question of right and wrong doesn't come into it. If you are feeling something, that is a part of what you are feeling. And that feeling that you have is a way of describing the significance of this issue for you, what it means to you, why it feels so important to you. And now we can have a deeper conversation, one that gets us into the relationship. What's next after that? Well, after that comes a higher order still of dispute resolution. And this is the order where now we've talked about the physical conflict and the mental conflict and the emotional conflict. This is the spiritual conflict, which is, I'm going to redefine spiritual for you. Spiritual, in my version, means the quality of life energy that you have invested and the degree of your investment in the issue. In other words, are you still holding on to what happened to you yesterday? Or are you able to let it go? What do we call this in conflict resolution? We call it forgiveness. And forgiveness is, my definition of forgiveness is releasing yourself from the burden of your own false expectations. There is a writer in the United States whose name is Annie Lamont. She has a better definition. Her definition is giving up all hopes of having a better past.
Yeah.
It's over. They did it. It was done to you. And now what? Jean-Paul Sartre said, here's a quote, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." And that's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is a form of freedom in which you reclaim your life energy for yourself and no longer invest it in someone else or in what they did to you. That is what hatred is. Hatred is a continued investment in what somebody else has done. And now, hatred turns into revenge, and revenge recreates the cycle of conflict. So now there's one thing that is still beyond forgiveness. I think of forgiveness as spiritual because it's about what are you going to do with your life energy, or as there's a poet, Mary Oliver in the United States, who says, so what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And here's the key question in forgiveness. The question is, what is it going to cost you to hold on to what was done to you? And the answer is it's going to cost you your life. And now, what do we have? We have a reason why people engage in horrible acts to one another. It is a way of claiming people's lives, a way of preventing them from living the life that they want and deserve to live. And that is one of the motivations even for conflict. Think about it this way. All of you, I imagine, have been in relationships with someone that you loved that broke up. And while the relationship is breaking up, what would you rather the other person feel about you? Anger or indifference? And the answer is going to be anger. Why? Because anger shows that they care. And we're not over wanting them to care. What is their anger? It is a form of negative intimacy that keeps us together. I've mediated thousands and thousands of divorces. And I can tell you that the marriage is not over until people get over their anger at one another. You've got to move beyond it. But once you've moved beyond it, it's over. But until you move beyond it, it's not over. I don't care how many thousands of miles apart you are, it's not over. They own a part of your soul. And we have to stop and refuse permission for them to take that part of us. So now what's next? There's one more level. Think now about conflicts with the people that you love, intimate conflicts between intimate partners, between spouses, between people who are in love with one another, with children, with parents, with best friends. And ask yourself the question, what is the very first part of you that shuts down when there is a conflict? And what is the very last part of you that opens up to that other person again? And I think you will discover that it is your heart. And we shut our hearts. And we can stop the fighting. We can settle the issues. We can have a really useful, emotionally intelligent conversation. We can even forgive the other person and never open our heart to them again completely. It's always just a little bit closed. There's a poem by the French poet Apollinaire, and he says, here's a quote from the poem. He says, "People's hearts are poorly smothered fires. They open and shut them like their doors." And what we need to do is to figure out, how do we open our heart again? And that, I think, is the last piece of conflict resolution, and in a way, the most important piece, and an entry into a kind of a level, not just of transformation, because each of these stages is a transformation, a change in the form of the conflict. This is a transcendence, a complete transcendence of the conflict. When you are able to open your heart again, it's actually over. Totally, completely, 100% over. If you can forgive someone, it may be 95% over, 97, 98% over, but there's still that little piece inside of you. So what are we doing? We are taking this in a circle. We started with the fact that conflicts are located inside of us and between us and around us. And we're back now to within us. to what it is that we're holding on to in our own lives about the conflict. The more we have been damaged, the more we have suffered, the more difficult it is to let go of what has happened to us. And in catastrophic cases where there is serious trauma, we can't even ask. Instead, what we have to do is something completely and entirely different. And that is ask people to dedicate some part of their life to making sure that no one else will suffer again as they have. And that makes sense to them. That is a way of converting our trauma into a gift to others, which then becomes a gift to ourselves, because we have changed the form of the trauma inside of us by turning it into a gift to other people. What we have learned. I have a friend who works with prisoners in San Quentin who were spousal batterers. They beat their spouses, and he works with them. And what he does is he takes them to high schools, and he has them talk to the football team or to young men in the school and tell them what they learned about this violent impulse inside of themselves and how to handle it. And that is their redemption. And there's a last sixth level of dispute resolution. What's better than not just stopping the fighting, settling the issues, resolving the underlying emotional issues, forgiveness? The hard piece is reconciliation. That's our word for it. What's better than all of those is prevention. That is, redesigning the systems that get people into conflict in order to prevent them from occurring at all. What are those systems? They're communication systems, relational systems, ethical systems, belief systems, organizational systems, social, economic, and political systems. There are massive numbers of systems, family systems. And what we want to look at is this conflict one of a kind? Hasn't happened before and it's not going to happen again? Or is there a stream of conflicts that are flowing within this relationship? Is this one of many? Even just, there could just be two of them, and you can still begin to see the outlines of a system. And when there is a system, the difficulty is the system doesn't show up for the mediation, and nobody thinks of blaming the system. So the system can be, for example, a lack of communication about how we want to talk to one another when we have disagreements. I do a fair amount of work with couples that are considering getting married. And I love this work because you get to ask a whole series of questions. One is, how did your parents handle conflict? Have you had any conflicts yourselves? What happened that you didn't like? What would you like to make sure it doesn't happen again? And now they're beginning to talk about how they're going to argue with one another in the future. And we write it down and they sign it and we put it on the refrigerator door and leave it there, or whatever it may happen to be. There are a whole series of different ways of doing it. Here's another one that I love. What does the word husband mean to you? What does the word wife mean to you? What does the word marriage mean to you? The word family, the word sibling. Any of these are entry points to surface what is lying hidden in this relationship. And that is a set of expectations and assumptions about who each other are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So the difficulty is how to help people talk about the stuff that they don't talk about. And what do they mostly not talk about? Everything that is most important to them is last on the list of stuff to talk about. Everything. Intimacy, sexuality, what hurts your feelings, how to be able to tell someone that something that may upset them and not get into a fight over it. And what we are fundamentally doing is building conflict resolution skills within the relationship so that people can graduate to higher order disputes because they have figured out how to stop the lower order ones. Here is a very, very simple technique that you can use in any argument anywhere between any two people. They're yelling and screaming at each other, they're arguing, and it's not really a dialogue, it's just serial monologues. Here's your question. Excuse me, can I ask you a question? And they'll say yes. And your question is this: is this conversation working for you? Because it's not working for me. And now you can ask another question. Here's a beautiful question. What is one thing I could do that would make this conversation work better for you? I'm willing to do that. Now, would you be willing to hear one thing I think you could do that would make it work better for me? And now you're in a completely different conversation. Here's another one you can follow it up with. On a scale between 1 and 10, 10 being highest, how would you rank the conversation we were having before I interrupted? They'll say 2, -3, 0, something like that. How would you rank the conversation we're having right now? 5, 6? You just shifted completely. How are you ranking it? And then ask this question: what would it take for you to make it a 10? What are we waiting for? Let's go for a 10. Okay, so now what we can see is we are bringing awareness to the process of communication. And we are bringing awareness to the quality of our relationship. Here's a question for families or for couples. What words would you, when I do family mediations, I often start with this question to both people or to the whole family. What words would you use to describe the kind of family you most want to belong to? What words would you use? Somebody says, I want a family that's caring. Guess what? That one feels uncared for. Somebody says, I want a family that's honest. Guess what? That one feels lied to. I want a family that is respectful. That one feels disrespected. And then you can ask the question, does anybody disagree with any of those words that any of you have offered? I've done this many times. No one has ever disagreed. Who doesn't want a family that's honest, that's loving, that's respectful, that's caring? They all do. So I will say, congratulations, you've reached consensus. Now, here's question 3. Are each of you prepared right now, in this conversation we are having right now, to begin trying to live up to those words? And they will say yes. Last question. Do any of us have permission to stop this conversation if it isn't working or we aren't living up to those words? Do we all have permission to stop the conversation? And they'll all say yes. Now we can start to talk. And now here's an important element in this process. I think you have all heard mediation described as an interest-based process. And positions are different from interests. A position is what you want. An interest is the reason why you want it. And so when we talk, for example, about the magic in mediation that I've written this book about, one of the things that we are talking about is the shift in the conversation, taking it out of the place where we're stuck and moving it into a place where it isn't possible to get stuck in the same way. And that is a kind of evolutionary imperative for the conversation. It is something that changes the ecology of the relationship. So now let me give you an example, a concrete example of this. First, let me just tell you this. There are 3 categories of questions that I can ask everyone on this call. 3 categories. Category 1, who is the oldest person on this call? It's probably going to be me. Who's the youngest? Who's the tallest? Who's the shortest? Who lives the closest to downtown Paris? Who lives the furthest away? And notice that there is a single correct answer for everyone for each of these questions. And those because there's only one tallest, one oldest, one shortest, one youngest, one closest, one furthest away. And notice now we can put those answers on a line, meaning they are one-dimensional answers to a one-dimensional question. Because everything about it can be determined by one fact: how old you are, how young, how tall you are, where you live. Okay, so now also notice once it's on a line, you can turn that line vertically and make it into a hierarchy so that there are some on top and some on the bottom. And the ones on the top can be the oldest or the youngest or the tallest or the shortest or whatever it may happen to be. But notice that it is automatic, that you have the possibility of creating hierarchy once you have moved into a one-dimensional conversation. That's category 1. Here's category 2. How old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live? And now there isn't a single correct answer for everyone. There's a single correct answer for each person. And each of you then has a different answer, but there is a single correct answer for each person. So the first set of questions corresponds to relationships on the basis of power. And the second corresponds to relationships on the basis of rights. That is, these are the kinds of questions that are asked in court by lawyers, questions that have a single correct answer for each person. And now here comes category 3, the interest-based questions. Here's the question. What issues are you facing at whatever age you're at? What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you when you were growing up? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And notice now there are multiple correct answers for each person. And even saying what's correct and what isn't doesn't make sense anymore, because it's just how you are feeling about where you are living. And that could change from one moment to the next. And it doesn't make your earlier comment wrong or false. Instead, it adds to it. And aren't these complex answers much more interesting and much more useful in solving problems than the answer that is correct for all of us. So notice that the power of asking questions is extends to the form of the question, not just the substance, but the way that the question is presented. Because the interest-based questions are basically saying, I don't want to know the fact, I want to know you. I want to know who you are. And the purpose of the question is to invite you to reveal yourself to me. And in order to do that, I need to demonstrate to you that I actually really want to know, that I care about who you are. And the difficulty with power-based systems is they don't care about who you are. Not really. And neither do people in rights-based institutions like courts. There is a concern for the category that you represent, the category of fact, the category represented in the law, the ethical category, whatever it may happen to be. But for who you are as a person, and for your complexity, and for your evolution, and for the way that you are coming to terms with the issues that you are facing, that's something different. And yet that's exactly what we want in conflict resolution. But notice how the quality of the question transforms the mediator and not just the parties. Who do we become? And the answer is we become someone who cares about them. And here there is a fundamental difference in the way you will hear mediation described by most other people and the way I'd like to describe it and the way that it makes sense to me. Mediation is often described as a kind of neutral process. Mediators are neutrals. But in a car, neutral means you're not in gear. And as between left and right, neutral means you have no direction. And so I think there is something better than neutral. What neutral makes sense with is anyone who's exercising power or rights in connection with you, you want to make sure that they are not biased against you. That makes sense. But here's what's better than not being biased against you: being biased equally in favor of you. And I wrote a book many years ago called Mediating Dangerously, and in that I call this omnipartiality. And what omnipartiality means is being on everybody's side at the same time, which doesn't mean agreeing with them. It means refusing to dismantle your own capacity for empathy and compassion by casting them out as someone who you cannot understand or figure out or come to terms with or see as a fellow human being. And that is what hatred does. And the difficulty is it is very easy for us to slip into hatred because it's simply the flip side of our own pain. That's all it is. And so what we want to try to figure out how to do is to get to a place in which it is possible for us to ask questions that reveal our caring about them so that they can reveal their caring about each other. And that's what these questions do. Let me give a concrete example. I was asked to mediate a dispute between two women. One was a supervisor and the other was an employee, and they were fighting literally about everything. So the supervisor was considering whether to fire the employee. And this was in a very large corporation. And so I was invited in to do the mediation. The room that we were going to meet in, however, was locked. And we had to send away for the janitor to get the key. And while we're waiting for the key, we're sitting out in the lobby And we can't really talk about the issues because there are people walking by. And so I asked what at the time I thought was a very innocent, meaningless question. And the question was, can you tell me a little something about yourselves? And that is a heart-based question. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it helps in a very tiny, tiny way open people's hearts by saying there's someone who wants to know who you are, someone who is willing to be open to whatever your answer may happen to be, who is not prejudging you. And so it turned out in the space of about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, that they both came from families of 10 or more children. Guess which birth order the supervisor was?
Oldest.
Number 1.
Yep.
Guess which birth order the employee was? Number 10. The baby. And they knew each other suddenly, just completely, totally backwards and forwards to 14 decimal points. They understood every single thing that had happened to them. And they knew exactly how to talk to each other and what kinds of things they could get away with and what kinds of things they couldn't. And the baby could say, "You're not my mom. You're not the boss of me," or whatever it may happen to be. And the other one would say, "Well, you'd stop being such a baby. Don't be such a brat," or whatever it may happen to be. And now they started laughing because they were family. And in that moment, this conflict that had been going on for years, that was about to result in the termination of this employee, disappeared completely, 100% gone. Where did it go? Where was it to start with? And the answer is it was in a kind of shallowness. It consisted in a kind of superficiality that never thought to find out who the other person actually was. Because what happens when that happens is we start to connect with each other. We are naturally empathetic. That is the role of stories. Stories are empathy creating devices. And I learned something very important in that moment. Try to find out what people have in common. Try to find out what they share. I did another mediation a while later, which was a man who had been fired from work and he was suing the employer, claiming it was employment discrimination based on his age, because he said he was fired because he was old, and they denied it. And there were sort of 10 lawyers on each side of the table because he was a very high-ranking employee and there was a lot of money at stake. And the man who was the employee who had been fired had a Greek last name. And the attorney for the corporation that fired him also had a Greek last name. And when he came into the room, he started speaking to the guy who was suing him in Greek. And they started having this conversation in Greek, and it started getting very excited. And at one point, the lawyer for the man who was suing the company said, "Wait a minute, this doesn't feel comfortable to me to have a conversation with my client in a language that I don't understand." And they both apologized. And the lawyer for the company said, "We just found out that our parents live in the same community just a few miles apart, and they know each other. And we settled every issue in about 30 minutes. Why? They weren't the enemy anymore. Why? Because they were able to discover something about each other that was human, that resonated inside of them. And that is the power of questions and the power of conflict resolution. So what do we need to do in order to do this? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need, once again, to stop the fighting, because you can't do any of this until the fighting stops. And then we need to try to talk about the issues and decide what's going on there. And while we are doing that, or at a sort of after we have done it or in the process, we have to figure out which is the right way to do it. We need to find out why people feel so strongly about this. What is happening emotionally for them? What does it mean to them? Here's another mediation I did. This was a marital mediation, a husband and wife who were arguing all the time. They'd only been married for 3 years, but they were really, really arguing and considering the possibility of divorce. And so we met and had a really good session. And then they came back a week later. And I said, as I would typically ask, how has it been for you since our last session? How have things been? He said, great. She said, awful. Okay, so you can't go with great if somebody says awful. So I turned to her and I say, what was awful about it? And she said, well, just this morning, as we're getting ready to come and see you, he left his dirty dish in the sink. And he goes, he can't believe that she's saying this. And then she says, well, that's just like you. And now they start yelling at each other and they're off and running. So I let this go a little bit. In mediation, you're taught to sort of stop the conversation when they, sort of start yelling at each other. But sometimes you want to actually be able to let it go because you'll learn a lot more by watching what happens. And I wanted to let it go because I wanted to find them inside of me. I had to find them. And the first one I found was her. And by finding her inside of me and asking myself this question, here's what appeared to me. There is a big fight going on and a lot of emotion. And on the other side of it is a dirty dish in the sink. And those two things don't automatically equal each other. So what's going on? And so I stopped, I turned to them, I said, excuse me, can I ask you a question? But they were too busy arguing, so they wouldn't let me in. I waited a little bit, and then I asked them again, excuse me, can I ask you a question? Finally, they said yes. So I turned to her and I said, what did it mean to you that he left his dirty dish in the sink? And she said, it means he doesn't respect me. Okay. All right, now we can begin to have an answer to why she feels so strongly about the dirty dish in the sink. And he's listening very carefully because he's never thought of it this way. But this doesn't quite get deep enough for me in terms of my finding her inside of me. I feel, as her, that there's something still deeper. And so I ask her a deeper question. And I may be wrong about it. If I'm wrong, she's going to tell me. Here's my deeper question. What did it mean to you that he doesn't respect you? And she said, it means he doesn't love me. Okay, now we're there, right? So we have moved from the conflict over the dirty dish in the sink, which was going absolutely nowhere, to a conversation about respect, which is definitely going to go somewhere. But where it needs to go is to the ground of that feeling. And the ground of that feeling is, he doesn't love me. That's what I was feeling inside of myself. And that's why I asked the question and then she answered it. Okay, she just took a risk by saying it means he doesn't love me. That's a challenge to the whole relationship. And it's a question that he needs to be able to answer. And so I turn to him and I say to him, how can you possibly invite him to answer that question? I have to say to him, I have to give him permission to say, you're right, I don't. How do I do that? I turn to him and I say, is that right? Is she right? Do you not love her? And he says, no. And I say, no, don't tell me. Tell her. So he turns to her and he says, honey, I do love you. and I do respect you, and I'm sorry, but I left the dirty dish in the sink, and I won't do it again. And he starts backing up as fast as he can, because he can see now what this is for her, and this isn't what he meant at all. He never thought of it as being an expression of this. Now the question is, why does it mean that to her? And once again, I have to go now back deep inside of me to find her in me. And here's the question I come up with for her. What is going to happen to the dirty dish in the sink? What does she say? She says, I'm going to wash it. And I say, why? And she says, because I'm supposed to. And I said, who says? She says, well, that's the way I was taught. And now we can see why the dirty dish means he doesn't respect her, and why it means he doesn't love her. Because if he loved her, he would understand that she feels responsible for cleaning the dishes in the house, in the kitchen. This is her responsibility. And if he leaves the dirty dish there, what he is saying without saying a word is, you're supposed to clean this. It's your responsibility, not mine. That isn't his script, that's hers. And now the question is, where do we go from here? And so there's a lot of in-between conversation, but one of the questions I ask him is, are there things like this for you that you do around the house that you feel are your job to do? And that maybe your work isn't as appreciated as it could be? Or there are ways in which she adds to your work that she isn't aware of? Yes. Okay. Now, have the two of you ever talked about this? No, never. Okay. Are you willing to talk about it now? Great. Now we've got an agenda. What are the jobs that need to be done in the house? Who wants to do what? And what kind of support do you need in order to be able to do it? What expectations do you have of the other one in terms of what they're going to say or do that would help make this work for you? I worked with the CEO of Disney Feature Animation. This is with the whole top leadership of Disney Corporation Feature Animation that makes all the movies. And he said, when I go shopping, I expect my family, when I come home, to applaud and say, great shopping, Peter. And of course, he was being facetious, but on some level, that is really what he wanted. But he didn't know exactly how to say it. He wanted to be appreciated. Well, who doesn't want to be appreciated? Everybody's contributing something. Why shouldn't we create a marital culture of appreciation in which people say thank you for whatever it is that you do? And why can't we say to the other person, I would really appreciate it if you would say thank you? Why? Because we want it so badly. And that's one reason why conflicts do not settle, because we want them to so badly, because it means so much to us that we can't say what's really important, what really matters. Okay, so now here's where we go from here. What are these questions that I'm asking? And the answer is, they are questions that are attempting to dig beneath the surface of what people are arguing about, the dirty dish in the sink, that they may be right or wrong about, and we can argue about it, frankly, forever, down to what it is that really matters to them. And the truth is, I have no idea what really matters to them. What I do know is that it isn't the dirty dish in the sink, because the amount of emotion surrounding it is way too intense. something else is going on. And when in doubt between the issue and the emotion, always go with the emotion. And now, here's what we do with the emotion. We acknowledge the emotion. We allow it to be expressed. We bring it into open conversation. And then we turn the emotion in the direction of problem solving by turning it into an interest. That is what somebody really wants. And here's the deal with emotion. We think of emotions as being large scale, intense feelings. And of course, we have emotions that are large scale, intense feelings. But here's a question you may or may not know the answer to. This is neurophysiological research. Do you know what happens to people who have strokes in the emotional processing centers of their brains, what they can no longer do? And the answer is they can no longer make decisions of any kind. So on YouTube, there's a woman who had an emotional, a stroke in the emotional processing centers of her brain. And they took her to a grocery store and asked her to pick out a potato. And she couldn't do it. Because in order to pick out a potato, she has to pick the one she likes. And that is an emotional activity. Everyone here is wearing something that they picked out this morning to wear because they liked it. In other words, you had an emotional experience getting dressed this morning. And now, if we see that that is what is at the base of emotion, then we can begin to see how it is possible to shift from simply emotional processing, which again can become stuck, into emotional acknowledgement and the transformation of the emotion into a step in the direction of problem solving. Because here's the way the brain is set up. We've got a huge amount of real estate in our heads devoted to emotion. And that wouldn't exist evolutionarily if there wasn't some reason for it. And there are at least two reasons for it. The first is what we call threat detection. That is, can we find out whether something is coming our way with aggressive techniques? And the second is a shift in the nature of our mental processing from slow to fast. And there is a writer in the United States whose book has been translated into many languages, possibly Ukrainian, Daniel Kahneman, and he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's about how each one of these can trip you up. So you can ask a question that you can, sort of think fast about, and it turns out that only a slow approach will give you the answer. And so part of what we are looking at with emotion is the desire to get rid of the negative feeling that emotion induces inside of us. And how do we get rid of it? One classic way is by passing it on to someone else, dumping the emotion onto somebody else. Let them experience it. And this actually serves a purpose. We want them to understand what it feels like to be treated this way. Someone insults you, what's the first thing you do? You insult them right back. And here, what are you saying? You're saying two things. One, don't do that because I don't like it. So I'm pushing you away by insulting you. But second, I would like you to understand what it feels like to be insulted. Only instead of using my words, which I'm not going to do because I don't really trust you enough to believe that you're going to treat my vulnerability respectfully. Instead, what I want to do, and words aren't going to be that useful for you anyway, instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an experience of what it feels like to be insulted, so that you will then understand what it feels like to be in my shoes and you won't insult me anymore. Good luck. Okay, it's not going to happen because each person is now insulting the other one, and they're both responding in exactly the same way, both of them trying to teach the other one what it feels like, and none of them stopping long enough to get it. And so what we then have to figure out how to do is to turn that conversation that is circular into a spiral. And we do that through the mechanism of interests. For example, what would you like to see happen instead? That is a question that automatically takes an emotion, what would you like, and turns it from the past into the future. And so we can move from what does that mean to you, which is a way of eliciting interests, into what you would like to see happen in the future. And now we have a completely different conversation taking place. I did a neighbor to neighbor mediation, two neighbors who hated each other, and they were yelling at each other, and one of them turned up the sound in their living room of their music. So it was right opposite the other one's bedroom late at night to keep them awake. I mean, they were doing these things back and forth to each other. So I brought them together, and one of them had to leave early. And so I said, well, you know, let's, are you willing to agree on a ceasefire or to stop the fighting and stop reporting each other to the police for 1 week while we try to solve this? And one woman said, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. And I said, I'm not asking you to do it for her. I'm asking you to do it for you. Oh, okay. And it was that simple. As long as I asked her to do it for her, she was totally happy to do it, but not for that other woman. And of course, it wasn't directed at the other man. It was directed at the other woman. And now we can see kind of like how this dynamic played out at an emotional level. But meanwhile, all I had to do is to say, let's look into the future and not do it for them, but to do it for you. Boom, agreement in place. Now, how many of those little places are there? And the answer is an infinite number. And we have no idea where they are until we get into the conversation and discover what it is that is actually taking place. And how do we discover it? By asking questions. Now, here's the problem. Virtually all the questions that we ask are safe, superficial, half-hearted, very cautious, very conservative, very, very excessively respectful. And the respectful part isn't the problem. The problem is the caution. And now the question is, what will happen if you ask a question that isn't cautious? And the answer is, of course, you could lose them unless you develop the skill that enables you to ask the question without producing that consequence. And how do you do that? First, you form a relationship to the other person through listening, through asking safe questions. You establish that you are concerned about them. And I can tell you, you establish this in the first 10 seconds of meeting them. They can tell with one look at you whether or not you are open to the kind of conversation that they desperately need to have with each other, but don't know how to. And if you haven't got the ability to hold that conversation, they will know it and they won't go there. So how do you have the ability to hold it? The answer is you have to be willing to ask the same question about yourself. And what kind of questions do we want to ask? Here are some questions about asking questions. And let me just see, let me just bring this up. Let me just read a couple of these. Is the question dangerous enough? So a question that has no danger in it is probably not worth asking. What is the danger? The danger is that everybody's life could change as a result of the answer. That is a dangerous question. And now let's take a look at this differently. Here is everybody dancing around this conflict, avoiding with as much energy as they can possibly bring what's right at the center and will free them. And they're avoiding it precisely because it will free them, because they don't know what comes next, because they don't know who they are without the conflict, because they've been so focused on this that they're afraid of what they'll lose as a result of what this conflict has to teach them. Here's another question. And you can ask this question to the other side. This is one of my favorite questions. What question would you most like to ask the other person? What question would you most like the other person to ask you right now? Or you can do it yourself if it's with your spouse or your family members. What question would you most like me to ask you right now? Try that with a teenager and see what you get. And now here's another one, much more dangerous. What question are you most afraid of being asked? Here's another one. What in your life or in theirs could change based on your answer? What is the type and quality of energy contained in the question? How much audacity and how much kindness is represented in the question? Are you willing to ask the same question of yourself? How prepared are you to be shocked by the answer? And how might we turn whatever your answer is into a deeper question? Okay, so now we can see there are questions that can drop people to their knees, questions that can take their breath away. And what are these questions? They are about the truth of what is happening to them, the truth of their life. And now, what right do we have to ask questions that take them to that truth? The only right we have is that we care about them. And we care because that answer could free them. And the only way we know that is by asking that question of ourselves. Okay, so last piece of this, and then I'm going to open it up for your questions and comments and whatever it is that you want to ask. There are hundreds of different mediation interventions, thousands. We can ask questions like, what just happened in the conversation we were just having? Or what do you think should be done? And why do you think we should do it? We can be supporting and acknowledging. We can explore the issues that people present. We can summarize what they say to us. We can help reorient them, we can turn the issue in the direction of problem solving. What are we looking for? And I think that we are looking really for three sets of openings. First of all, we are looking for an opening in the direction of what lies immediately beneath the surface of their conversation up until now. What are they trying to communicate that they haven't yet put into words? What is it that remains unspoken? And you can ask this question of people in conflict in the mediation. What are you not yet talking about that you could talk about, and that would actually make you feel better to get out in the open and talk about? What issues, here's one for your spouse. What issues are you holding on to that I don't even know about? Okay, here's one of my favorites at the beginning of a mediation. I don't always ask it, but sometimes I do. After this is before we begin. After this mediation is over, you're going to be driving home tonight thinking about what we did here today. What are you going to wish that you had said? Now, you would never imagine that that question would work, but it does. Why does it work? Because they've been desperate for somebody to ask them to tell them what is really going on for them. They want somebody to care enough to really dig and find out what that answer is, the way their mom did or their dad did when they cared about them. That's what they want. And is it risky? Absolutely. So the only way you can do it is by doubling down on the empathy so that they understand this is the omnipartiality. I like to think of it this way. When I am mediating, I fall just a little bit in love with everybody. Not a lot. A lot is a problem, but just a little bit. Enough to be able to just say, wow, there's something wonderful about this person. And once I find that, then I can speak to that person and draw that one forth, bring that one out. What is this work? This is spiritual work. This is heart work. This is turning that dance of opposites into a waltz, a tango, hip hop, whatever it may happen to be, but turning it into something absolutely beautiful. Okay, so last piece. Are you going to fail? Absolutely. Every conflict, every mediation is a failure from start to finish until suddenly you do something that works. But it's a continuous set of failures. Every intervention you try, including, what's your name? And they're going to answer in an angry way until all of a sudden you hit the place where the magic is hidden, at which point everything starts to shift. So go for that feeling. Go for the feeling of what is about to shift, what needs to shift. Find it in you. Give yourself permission to go there, not in a brutal way, not in an unskillful way, by building your empathy beforehand. But the question we need to ask ourselves is not just, who am I to ask these questions? There's a second question. Who am I not to? So what is the failure in mediation? I think it's being overly preoccupied with success. And what is success? It means being willing to fail. Because only in this way can we find out what is really going on. For me, what I do is I consecrate my failures to the benefit of those I will be with next. I dedicate them to all those people I will be meeting with next. That's the most I can do. But you can't do this work without having experienced failure. Okay, that's it, folks. We have a little bit of time left at the end. I'd meant to put you into small groups, but we just got going here. So questions, comments, issues, difficulties, vigorous disagreements, burning questions, whatever you may have.
Well, Kenneth, I just wanted to extend just my heartfelt appreciation. You have been my mentor. Your books have been just such remarkable points in my life. And I've trained, at Nova Southeastern, we're one of the earliest conflict resolution programs established 30 years ago. So if you can only imagine how many lives of students you've impacted through my teachings, because you have been so instrumental in what I've shared and disseminated through your teachings. But I think of myself 20 years ago without your books, and I thought the whole essence of being a conflict resolutionist was to just get that conflict resolved. And now I look at myself 20 years later, 25 years later, of the maturity of how much it is relational. How much of our role as a mediator is to build the relationship. If you don't trust, you cannot, have any sort of outcome with that individual. So much of my obligation as a mediator is to help parties trust each other, build that relationship. And you spend so much time, even in the training these last 2 days, about how you have to ask those dangerous questions, how you have to ask about the fear, the risk, the hopes. And it is those questions from the heart. And that spiritual element of mediation, I always tell my students, I hope you can feel that, because that's when you really know that you're navigating in a mediation and in a very inspiring way. And people will leave the mediation in a mediation if you have that power, that you invite that space for that spiritual sort of growth and inspirational sort of relationship building that happens there. Like you mentioned, so many examples of people that hated each other and how you could get them see each other as human beings, to want to work together and to collaborate. And those are the essence of our field in peace building and conflict resolution. So more, it's just you've had such a beautiful career and lifelong dedication to this, but I want to let you know through our students, inspiration. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you're just truly amazing. And these Ukrainian students that are here today, you have to understand who you're talking to. He's a pioneer in our field. He started our fields. So this is like having a hero, like a rock star of a rock star in our space. So it's such a privilege for him to spend the time with you here today. So thank you, Kenneth. I really appreciate your involvement with this beautiful project too, and these amazing Ukrainian students who I know are through Lynn, the new ambassadors of peace and mediation in this part of the world. And what happened to Ukraine will never happen again because of these remarkable students.
Wonderful, Alexia. Thank you so much for that. It's beautifully said. Let me actually show you a slide in your materials just so that you can see it, that builds on what Alexia was just saying. And it is this one here, How to Rebuild Trust. The previous slide is about what reduces trust. And you can see all the various things that we do that reduce trust. And then what is it that rebuilds it? Honesty about ourselves, openness about problems, unconditional respect, meaning regardless of what anyone has done, having complete respect for them. Clarity about boundaries is a really important one. Consistency over time, actions based on vision or values, etc. I'd like you to just know about this and then be able to use this chart if you would like to. And once again, as I mentioned before, Chuck wasn't here yesterday, so I'll mention it for him. These slides belong to you. You're welcome to use them in whatever circumstances you like, and you're welcome to turn them into Ukrainian, not only in language, but in sort of style and culture, and whatever other languages you may speak. Any other questions before we end?
If I may ask, Ken, I kind of want to build on what Alexi is saying. And I also know from my own, professional experience that initial trust and ability to connect with a person is really the key for any productive discussion and communication. And due to the nature of what we are facing in Ukraine, I understand that each mediation is unique and specific, but can you reflect anything about, mediating with veterans, when civilian, trying to initiate that initial trust with a person, has PTSD and a war veteran, there is like an additional barrier and
Yes.
to go through that barrier and actually any practical advices or any comments you may say would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sergey. Very important issue. Lynn and I are members of a group called Mediators Beyond Borders International, and MBBI has done a number of different projects around the world. One of the first ones was in among child soldiers in the Buddha Durham refugee camp in Ghana, and another was in Rwanda. And in Rwanda particularly, but also in all the work with the child soldiers, and then again in Kenya, when we were working there, what we discovered was everybody in Rwanda was traumatized by what had happened, and every conflict re-triggered the trauma. And so what we created was something called trauma-informed mediation. And yes, there is PTSD and trauma not only among the frontline soldiers, there is the vicarious trauma of the caregivers, which includes us. So mediators also are subject to vicarious trauma. And what we need to then be able to do is to have groups like this where you can share. There's someone who I think is actually speaking in Ukraine today. His name is Michael Lang, and he's doing really excellent work on what is called reflective practice and creating reflective practice communities. And getting together and talking about your experiences is a wonderful way of doing it. And another piece of this is, I said before, this is really sacred work. And sacred in the sense of incredibly powerful and meaningful and deep and significant in the lives of people. And we need to have a profound sense, deep sense of humility about what it is that we are doing. And it's only that humility that allows us to be audacious with our questions. It's only the humility that lets us be honest in a deep and fundamental way. Without it, it becomes aggressive. And so a part of what we are looking for is how to work with the traumas in our own lives, because every one of us has experienced conflicts. Every one of us has experienced trauma of one kind or another, some of us way more than others. But even the tiniest little piece of trauma inside of us is something that we can work with and begin to understand how to deal with in connection with other people. And there are several ways of doing this. One way, one of the most effective ways, is through stories and storytelling. And another way, as Alexia described, is by reaching others, teaching others, going out and telling others what you have experienced and how and why. And that has a profound impact as well. And here's fundamentally what we, I think, need to know. The world is a complex place filled with lots of different problems and people behaving badly towards one another. What we desperately need to create is an alternative approach to resolving conflicts on all levels in all societies, and it begins with us. If we ask the question, who's going to do it? The answer is only us. So now there's one important thing to remember, and Alexia knows this because she's a teacher as well. I describe it this way. You can count the number of seeds in an orange, but you can't count the number of oranges in a seed. And you are planting those seeds in people. And we have no idea what's going to happen in 10 years, in 10 months, in 10 days. But what we do know is that without these skills, we aren't going to be able to make it. And we need desperately to create what I call a conflict revolution. That is a fundamental shift in the ways that we handle conflict and trauma throughout our societies. Mostly we suffer alone. And what mediation offers us is one way of suffering together. And this is just one skill. Restorative justice skills are another. Nonviolent communication skills are another. But what works the best in connection with trauma is to dedicate a part of your life to opposing it, to communicating and witnessing what it did. That worked, has worked in previous traumas, and I think will work again. So this is a tiny little bit of what we need to really do, but I hope that you will recognize, as Alexia has alluded to, this is a lifetime's work, and we keep learning. I'm learning every day.
Every day.
What I'm doing. Yeah. So I wish you great conflicts.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Dear Kenneth, thank you very much for your charity, for your wiseness, and for everything. We will spread your knowledge. They will be alive for a long, long years in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Ken, you are the greatest
you.
gift. Ken, you are the greatest gift we could have given our students. You are truly the greatest gift. So thank you, Ola, for sharing this recording, and please share it with the rest of the students. And Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Героям
supporting
слава.
me.
Everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.